Our next episode of Two Guys Discussing Russia Over Pastries is about economy and sanctions, or possible sanctions. And today our guest is Juliet Johnson, Professor of Political Science at McGill University. And we want to ask a question. Would cutting Russia off SWIFT system crush its economy? So what do you think, Juliet?
Well, I'm going to take the yes side on this one. And to understand why it's a yes, you have to understand what the SWIFT system actually does. And this is the system that allows banks to send messages to each other, telling them, you know, I want to put this amount of money into this person's account in this other bank. And it's a system that does it very quickly, it does it securely, and it does it cheaply. And it's run out of its headquarters are based in Belgium, but banks all over the world use this system. And so if you get cut off from this system, all of a sudden your major banks can no longer send messages to other banks about, you know, who should get what money. And if you think back to the way the Russian payment system worked right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when it was still all paper-based, and they tried to go and they tried to introduce a more dynamic commercial banking system, the payment system was actually one of the biggest obstacles to doing this well. I mean, everything got very backed up because the information couldn't be transferred quickly enough. So if you cut Russia off SWIFT, this is in essence what happens. And the important thing to note is that Russia is actually now a huge user of the SWIFT system. 600 banks in Russia, all of the major banks use SWIFT. 80% of Russian settlements go through the SWIFT system. And in terms of numbers of SWIFT users, Russia is the second largest user in the world, second only to the United States. So if you cut Russia off, and Russia doesn't have an alternative system right now, this not only disrupts external trade and payments, but it also disrupts internal transactions, because Russian banks use this to send information between each other as well. And so what happens if you cut Russia off SWIFT is that you potentially, as former Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin has recently said, you may get a 5% cut in Russia's GDP next year. It will be far more time-consuming and far more costly for banks to send this information between each other. And you can simply look to the only other time this kind of sanction was applied, and that was to Iran in 2012. The consequences for the Iranian economy were quite devastating. And so in financial terms, this really is the nuclear option, and it would be, at least in the short term, quite a terrible thing for Russia.
Well, thank you very much, not for only establishing your position, but giving us very good introduction to the topic as well. I wonder, what do you think?
Well, I found what Juliet said very convincing. However, I think what she said at the end of her statement was the most important part, which is in the short term. So I think in the short term, this is correct. It would be a devastating blow to the Russian economy, and it would make it very difficult for the financial system in Russia to operate, which would have enormous consequences for the rest of the economy. However, if anything, Russia has proven that it's a very resilient country. And so it would use this isolation imposed on it by the West as a way of creating its own financial system. And clearly Russia has the computer resources, the technical resources to build a similar messaging system, which obviously was set up among its own banks, and then work with other countries that are concerned about too much Western influence in the world. So I think in the short term it's true that the SWIFT would be devastating. Cutting Russia off of SWIFT would be devastating. In the longer term, though, it might build up a more independent, non-Western financial system.
Okay, so even in this major thing, Russian future is so unpredictable that the only thing we can do is toss a coin and figure it out. So as a guest, your position will be established by heads or tails?
Let's go tails.
So tails, cutting off SWIFT system, will crush Russian economy, and heads opposite.
Make it more resilient.
Oh, Russians will be pleased to know.
So it is heads, and cutting off SWIFT system won't have such a devastating impact on Russian economy.
All hail the Russian-led international financial system.
Thank you very much for coming to our show.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your views.